necessary for living. Nihilists see no objective meaning and thus find destruction in creating rather than creating in the aftermath of destruction. Scandal is the stumbling block where culture asserts its adolescence, no matter how timorous the assertion may be. Oppression itself is a nihilist act because it denies the will to power. The oppressed are denied voice. Why is it that poets tend toward melancholy? Do they feel deeply the problems of life? Are they committed to ameliorating them with the little efforts they have? The poet's melancholy is the product of a psychological inconsistency with the nature of reality. The poet, though sensitive and deeply committed to a radical trust in life, maintains a contradiction of spirit by anticipating change against oppression. History, being the product of class relations and economic advancement, negates itself by creating oppressive situations and even benefiting from them. By this I mean certain classes in fact relate their successes on the death of others. I do not want to stand here and bash capitalism. The industrial period has its charms. Simone Weil noted many years ago is that financial elites enjoy playing with stock rather than producing. However, technology actually bridges cultural expression and enables large-scale expression. While we often hate capitalists like Bezos, his company revolutionized book sales and enabled authors to self-publish and profit with greater ease. Again, the creative destruction of Amazon while depriving brick-and-mortar stores led to revolutions of cultural expression. It is now noted that brick-and-mortar stores are making a comeback because they offer community with other readers, and the spontaneity of finding books on the shelves is preferential for an assortment of buyers. Here we understand, again, the need for community among creatives and the nature of market economies in providing goods and services. I would like to say a few words on loyalty and what to expect from the craft of literature. As a successful writer myself, I recognize the dedication it takes to write great works the world will enjoy. I have spent countless hours writing terrible poetry, absolutely horrible poetry, to reach a craft of excellence. According to the Pareto formula, 10% of your efforts have 90% of the results. This translates into a small percentage of writings being truly successful, both individually and on the market. Poetry isn't intended to sell so much as build. Poetry is the essence of the craft of literature. The philosopher Martin Heidegger says of poetry, poetry is an essence of dwelling and existence, being. We only dwell unpoetically because we intrinsically know what it means to dwell poetically. We are all capable of being poetic by dwelling authentically. He elaborates, but poetry, as the authentic gauging of the dimension of dwelling, is the primal form of building. Poetry is essential to existence for the reason it is the circumference of our being. Let us return to loyalty. There are varieties of loyalty. You can be loyal to a friend, to a pet, or to a calling. Poetry is a calling. If you are meant to be within that calling, it will find you and, to an extent, dominate you. The muse is a treacherous being. She does not come without her prizes, though. Amongst poets I have found the most dazzlingly complex and problematic people whose words would stun readers with their beauties. Poets are human as well, though they engage with divinity. I have met a variety, some even narcissistic poets, which shattered my vision of the superior morals and empathy of the writer, and they have also made the most devoted friends. I spoke earlier of loyalty to friends. Poetry has brought me the finest friends I could ever have. Without poetry, I would not be presenting this speech to you today. Without poetry, I would not have most of the friends I now have who I love very much. Poetry is a trying thing in this world of woe. The essence of loyalty is commitment. One must be committed to the craft in order to achieve anything in it. Saw Bellow wrote in The New Yorker, I sometimes wondered whether I shouldn't be thinking about a very different course of life. Maybe I should apprentice myself to an undertaker. If even this Nobel laureate can feel the pains of the writer's life and experience doubt, It can come over any class of person. Doubt and conflict is essential to writing. It is not to be feared, for it asks many questions. Doubt is a great servant, but lousy master. In instigating our imaginations and thoughts, doubt crafts a kind of religious awe. Of course, it merits such awe in the frame of writing introspective works. Introspection will guide the writer through his or her unique perspective. I offer one point of guidance myself to future writers. Read as much as possible. Read more than you write. Learn to think like a reader in your writing. Appreciate eloquence and the classics. Don't dismiss them. Allow yourself a vigorous study of an important and influential works. If you cannot read, how can you write? Universities are fallow ground for reading and study. This is their unique purpose. I am myself an autodidact who was blessed with a love of literature. I appreciate it and revere it, and the moral failings of writers are my sustenance. As Eliot wrote, "Remember us, if at all, not as lost." We are not lost as the signs in the Garden of Delights are the very letters you are reading now. The collection of literary works you hold today will sustain your imagination forever. As a young man, I had a deep sense of inferiority. It came from being abused as a nonconformist in schools and being an abandoned child raised by my paternal aunt and grandmother. The general feeling of neglect wore on me. I wanted to be good for something. I wanted to offer the world something rich of beauty and in the process redeem my sense of self. My bipolar tendencies kept me aloof and often spurred my communication abilities, even in writing. I wrestled with the muse. She caused me a lot of anxiety. When under the throes of this anxiety, I wrote my thoughts and doubts through poetry. Anxiety is painful, and never doubt its creative push. It assuaged me to write. I also believed, after watching the movie Quiz Show, that I should memorize a few poems. I worked on Plath, Wordsworth, Shakespeare, Tennyson, and Blake. I fell in love with Mont Blanc by Shelley because of the philosophical complexity. I made a determined effort to grasp the facts of literature, but due to my independent nature, I felt unable to attend classes. I also suffered from extreme mental health trouble that caused me to drop out of the college I attended in Texas City. Shelley writes in Mont Blanc, "The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings of waters with the sound but half its own, such as a feeble brook will oft assume in the wild woods among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves." Here consciousness is embodied through natural imagery. Now dark, now glittering, captivates me in my bipolar moods. I first found this poem during the same time I absorbed Paradise Lost, reading a Wordsworth edition of Shelley. I thought I was close to giving up writing. One must never give up when fighting a losing battle. Let me discuss the poetic temperament briefly. Lord Byron said, "We of the craft are all crazy. Some are affected by gaiety, others by melancholy, but all are more or less touched." Why would a poet himself speak so boldly of his fellow poets if it were not a truth? Lord Byron was known for his insane mood episodes and abusive behavior, but today we remember his poetry, mostly. What is so beauteous in a poet's soul that the poetry stands with us as testimony of it in spite of difficult behaviors? T.S. Eliot declared in Preludes, "I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling, the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing." I believe he is referring to God in these lines. What else might he refer to? Is he referring to humanity? Is not humanity made in God's image? Are we not the very likeness of God? Regardless, the poet is a winged and holy thing touched by God's presence. In our ickering flights of imagination, only poets are brave enough to face God and express their grief. The poet's temperament is an expression of God's love. In fact, it is the highest form of God showing love to humanity. Why should pain and torment be associated with love? Hermann Hesse wrote, I began to understand that suffering and disappointments and melancholy are there not to vex us or cheapen us or deprive us of our dignity, but to mature and transfigure us. Proust wrote, we are healed of suffering only by experiencing it to the fullest. What could that possibly mean? I do not wish to glorify one of humanity's most profound problems. In the words of Epicurus, empty is the argument of the philosopher which does not relieve any human suffering. However, I believe the extent of suffering is better when one accepts its refuge in power. To suffer is to be moved. Why are poets writing so deeply on grief, melancholy, and travail? This seems to be the most profound realization of poetry, the power of suffering. I do not condone the travails and trials of humanity. For instance, I was deeply and safely moved by the recent earthquakes in Turkey. I felt a sincere power within me. There is always a stronger power in suffering pushing back in our souls against the negation. To quote Camus in part, within me there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. Sometimes in immense suffering one becomes numb. The body can only contain so much energy and power. Is it that suffering is a power beyond us? Pity us. We cannot avoid this power. We must come to terms with it. It is the very essence of our mortality. The pain of loss, for instance, is something that touches me greatly in the heart. Imagine losing a beloved friend. What does it mean? Is separation the way God communicates feelings of loss in dividing themselves from the world? Why should God divide themselves from humanity? Is there something to be expected from us mortals? If, as Christianity asserts, life is a test, what does it test? Jesus himself said he will reveal himself to anyone who keeps his commandments of love. Jesus is the Son of the Trinity, the physical aspect of God, the body. His suffering is a deep expression of the meaning of mortality. The test is a test of love. And in love we learn to let go, as well when the need presents itself. God does what he will in their infinite wisdom. God understands the best for us when we forget ourselves. Love is burdensome and requires commitment. Sometimes we wish to be relieved of it, but inevitably love cannot die. Grief is a love turned inward. Once a loss happens, love becomes fully actualized within us. I've suffered much loss myself, and I wish to touch upon the subject from my perspective. Whether it is a dear friend, a beloved relationship, a family member, a pet, or grief over one's personal shortcomings, grief is powerful. I believe it is the most powerful form of wisdom. I have learned much through loss. It causes you to reflect back and remember the things you missed. Memories and observations from the past are deepened in loss. A loved one becomes of infinite value. They assume the power of apotheosis. In loss, a loved one is divinity personified. The breach between humanity and God is the breach between language and its subject, object and subject, in Hegelian dialect, is needed in order for there to be life at all. The body must be separate from the spirit. The spirit is a world itself, as we say in the Our Father, on earth as in heaven, suggesting a reconciliation is possible between these worlds. I believe the essential purpose of love and life is a reunion between these worlds, and love is poetry. Jesus' own crucifixion is often derided as unnecessary suffering, but it is in fact an expression of divine temperament, and this is why it often comforts others. I once experimented with Buddhism. I respect the precepts. However, I must disagree with the concept of shedding oneself of attachment. If I understand the principle, it comes down to refusing to expect anything of life other than what it grants you. But in order to do this, one must accept attachment as a necessity in deepening one's nature. If one never becomes attached, one never gained anything from living. Buddhism tends toward atheism generally. I cannot imagine life without some creator who sympathizes with life's order, who created it from necessity, whose veins are within it. Know you always have a trusted friend in God's wisdom. Even in Buddhism, one strives for Buddha nature. It is a similar project to the Christian humanist principle that humanity will become Christ-like. By this, we will overcome our suffering someday. Perhaps, as Marx notes, technology will be our saving grace. Ultimately, our humanity will triumph. My humanist principles can be summarized by Rabindranath Tagore himself, who stated, "Let me not pray to the sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it. Let me not look for allies in life's battlefield, but to my own strength. Let me not crave an anxious fear to be saved, but hope for the patience to win my freedom. Grant me that I may not be a coward, feeling your mercy in my success alone, but let me find the grasp of your hand in my failure." Human action is necessary to overcome the power of physical suffering. Poetry is an action specifically for the comfort it offers the spirit. This is its purpose, its reason. Poetry makes nothing happen, but it is an event itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pickering, for this wonderful and thought-provoking talk on the topic poetry as an act of creation. Beneath this, what I felt is that the sub-theme of this particular talk was poetry in the age of scandal, as I have understood rightly. So poetry, indeed, as you have mentioned, is therapy. It is an aesthetic experience. At the same time, it has its cultural reference. It has also been used by many poets as a medium of protest. And poets in the age of scandal are the planners standing at the fringe of the society, commenting, lamenting, protesting, and influencing the greater mass. So, and the most important point that I have noted, which is very relevant to the contemporary and the younger generation, is its therapeutic effect, which serves. It has been served as a therapeutic effect in many of the works, and this is a burning issue in the contemporary time because, in fact, no other genre has been internalized by the reader so smoothly as does poetry. So, with this, thank you so much again, Mr. Pickering, and this session is open for the question and answers. Participants can unmute themselves if they join us in the virtual mode, and also the participants who have joined us in the offline mode, they can also ask the question. Thank you. Let me start. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting lecture. It's a long time since we heard something on poetry. It's always theory around here. Mm-hmm. So